This video is going to speak a little bit to getting a particular sort of retro 8-bit computer running, specifically those that can only manage to output RF modulated video. Specifically, we'll be talking about the Radio Shack TRS-80 MC-10 or microcolor computer and the Timex-Sinclair 1000. Now, both of these guys were bargain basement, made as cheap as possible. They both hit a $99 and $129 price point, respectively, if I recall correctly. And in order to cut costs, they only emit RF modulated video. They expect to be connected directly to the antenna input of an analog NTSC television. Now, obviously, those are a little bit hard to come by these days. Now, you could do the thrift store / Goodwill approach and get an old TV, although my space for my collection is pretty limited, so I really didn't want to waste space on yet another CRT if I didn't have to. So I got to thinking about a different approach. And what that turned out to be, due to just some random eBaying, was this little guy. This is it's a little hard to read because the lighting in here is terrible, but this is a Tektronix DS1001 television demodulator. Specifically, this is a DS1001G, a specific model number. And this is a piece of studio equipment, broadcast studio equipment, whose entire job is to demodulate NTSC video and at a pretty wide range of frequencies and broadcast standards, and turn it into regular composite video, as well as a few other formats. It also has a intermediate frequency output, which I would imagine would be useful for some studio purpose, but doesn't really help me that much. It's a particularly hefty bit of gear. It's almost half of a rack in depth, has its own cooling fan, steel case, very burly thing. Specifically, this one seems to have come from an EchoStar location where it tuned in WGHG channel 7. If anybody knows where that is, that would be interesting to know. But long story short, you put RF in and composite NTSC comes out. This was an eBay find. I got it for about 20 bucks. They seemed relatively common, although the price range varied wildly. Like I say, this one was about 20, maybe 30. Some of them go for as much as $600 or $900. I'm not sure what the difference is or if there is one, but this one works just fine. It got a few ICs knocked out of socket in shipping, which prevented it from working when I first got it, but it seems to work perfectly fine. So what I have is the Tektronix demodulator rigged up to my Commodore 1702 NTSC monitor, which is my old standby. Very trusty, very decent video monitor for its day. And what's interesting about this is when you turn it on, this is something a Commodore 1702 rarely does, which is display black and white NTSC video static. This is in fact what is being received by the demodulator when nothing is coming into it. Plugged directly into the demodulator is a 2-spot RF switch to simplify the fact that I have 2 RF sources connected to it. The MC-10 on the first input and the TS-1000 on the other. And it just works as advertised. If I switch on the MC-10, we see microcolor basic boot up. Sorry about the exposure on this. The room's a little dark, so all you'll see is the screen. But it works quite well. The image is fantastic. It's far better than the results that I got connecting it to the NTSC input on my plasma screen. Well, for one, obviously connecting it to an analog CRT is going to give you that sort of natural analog anti-aliasing that a CRT will get you, but very tight, very solid image, no noise, no crawl, no weirdness. It's really quite solid. If I turn on, first off, let's switch over to input B here. We go back to static until I turn on the TS-1000. You'll notice this one has a switch. That's because I built one. The TS1000 was so cheap it in fact did not come with a power switch. You just plugged it in and unplugged it. If I turn that on, it indeed cranks right up. And the video output, aside from the sort of lingering black bit toward the top, is really about as good as a Timex-Sinclair 1000 can manage, as far as I can tell. It's really quite solid. I could probably do a bit better with better cabling, and my screen here is picking up a little bit of array interference. I'm not sure if that'll happen at full resolution, but it is quite solid and quite clean. So that's a pretty easy way to bring in RF-only systems. This could also work with old video game systems, possibly some of the old Pong consoles that could only spit out RF. I'm sure there were other inexpensive machines. This demodulator can be configured to receive all manner of broadcast systems. I'm pretty sure it can only do NTSC, but it can be configured to read US, Canadian, Japanese, NTSC, all sorts of interesting things. So now I have these two little radio frequency oddballs connected into the same system that very handily also displays things such as my TS2068, which fortunately does come with its own composite output, although it certainly does take its sweet time to do anything with it. I guess I could go on, not off, that would work. And there we go. I also have the Atari 800 XL configured to a different switch. Yes, I'm using analog switching. It works reasonably well. The TI-99-4A will also be connected to this setup, although the video cable is currently being used for diagnostics on my VIC-20 that I'm trying to resurrect out in the garage. Another note about this setup is I have a Akai tape deck, which I acquired at some difficulty. Actually getting a functioning tape deck or getting a tape deck repaired is rather difficult to do these days. This is one of two that I have that's functioning. And the single deck unit is going to be used, although I don't have it configured quite yet, as program storage for the MC-10 and the TS-1000. So that's where the retro setup is at the moment, at least this table of it. I guess I'll do a sweep around the rest of the room just to show off how everything else is going. We have the Apple II Plus with the Monitor 3, working quite well, although it does have a few memory chips that need replacing. The Platinum 2E, currently sharing a monitor with the Plus. It's working perfectly, no problems there. The GS, also running perfectly. That's my primary transfer machine in order to make disk images for any of the Apples. And then of course the Plus and my SE Macintosh. Then over here, making the rounds, and I really probably should try and direct a bit more light in that direction. We have my somewhat decrepit TRS-80 Model 3, which still has a bit of work left to it. Commodore 64 and 5041 drive, Commodore 128 DCR and its 5071, my Amiga 500, and hiding under its dust cover there is my Coco 3. Okay, so that's kind of the status of my retro collection as it is now, and some interesting notes for possibly getting your own RF-only hardware running in your own lair, compound, or habitat. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.